So hey guys, I do believe that by this time you are already prepared for the exam next month, but still we can revise some important questions, some important topics in a very quick span of time. So here I am with your 10 most important topics, the things which have been asked frequently in your exam and which have got a high probability of being asked in your coming examination also. So let's see what all 10 I have got for you. So the first one I'm showing you here on the screen is a picture like this, which is a repeat in your All India exam as well as the INI exam. So what exactly we are looking at? We are looking at a fish, and in between the two vertebrae, at every intervertebral level you are going to have the same design. That's what you call a codfish spine appearance. So by this particular image, I just want to convey to you that you must revise, you must see the topic osteoporosis very carefully before you go into your exam. So what all important points you must remember about the osteoporosis? We know that osteoporosis, it's a proportionate decrease in all the constituents of the bone. Am I right on that? So osteoporosis, the most important thing that you'll have to remember is that the serum mineralization, it usually remains normal. So serum minerals are normal in osteoporosis. That is most important thing we have to remember. Second thing, we know that it is usually seen in the old age people, right? And the most common site that can be involved in osteoporosis, they are your vertebra, they are neck of femur, and in upper limb, the corticocancellous junction, the cancellous part of the bone which gets easily injured, the Colles fracture. That is a fracture around the wrist area. So we have got vertebra, we have got neck of femur, and we have got Colles. These are three important sites which are commonly involved in osteoporosis, right? And therefore the most common fractures that we see are in the vertebrae. Okay. Now, when you want to, diagnose about the patient of osteoporosis, obviously we start in orthopedics with the radiological investigations. In radiology, when you go for the X-rays, we get a typical feature like I have just shown you, the codfish spine appearance. That's a typical feature related to osteoporosis. So codfish appearance of the vertebrae, right? Whenever there will be a fracture, whenever there will be a trauma to the vertebra will have what kind of injury? Not a burst injury. It will only have a compression fracture. And what's the other name that we give to this kind of compression fracture? The compression fracture is what you call as the wedge collapse, anterior wedge, right? The wedge collapse, or the other simple name given for it is what you call as the impacted fracture. Now, I want you to remember these terminologies, the impacted fracture, compression fracture, wedge fracture, because this impaction, it occurs in the cancellous part of the bone, and therefore all the three sites which are commonly affected in osteoporosis, they can have the impaction as a feature. If you recall your Colles, impaction is one of the 6 displacements that the distal fragment shows you. Okay, so impaction is the most important thing that I want you to remember from here. Then when you wish to diagnose the osteoporotic patients, what is the gold standard for diagnosis of osteoporosis? The gold standard, we must remember, it's your DEXA scan, right? The gold standard will be your DEXA scan. And what we do in DEXA scan, what do we measure? We measure something known as the T-score. What exactly is that T-score? It is a comparison of the standard deviation basically between a healthy young person of the same gender as compared to that of our patient. That's what we call a T-score, right? So T-score, it is abnormal when it is less than or minus 2.5. When it has gone less than minus 2.5, then we say that it is definitive osteoporosis. Till 2.5, minus 1 to minus 2.5, what do we call it? That's what we call as the osteopenia, right? So osteoporosis, when it is less than it is less than minus 2.5. When it is equal to minus 1 or better than minus 1, we consider it as to be normal. So when you compare the bone mineral density of your patient as compared to that of a healthy young individual of the same gender is what you call a T-score, right? The bone mineral density. So this test is what you call as the DEXA scan, the dual energy X-ray absorptiometry. What we measure? T-score. According to which guideline? These are according to the WHO guidelines, right? Now, when you want to, treat the patients, you must have a combination of therapy, right? The therapies which actually, when you point about the treatment plan, then we must have the drugs which inhibit the resorption, and the drugs which promote the formation. So we must have a combination of these therapy, the drugs which inhibit resorption as well as the drug which promote the formation. So drugs inhibiting resorption, you know that the most important ones, they are bisphosphonates, right? They are bisphosphonates, they are calcitonin, they are estrogen, and they are selective estrogen receptor modulators. right? So bisphosphonate is the drug of choice all the time, whether they give you an option to select between the estrogen, calcitonin or anything else. Bisphosphonate, remember, is the drug of choice, right? Promoting the bone formation, the most important drug that I want you to remember, and I do believe you already know, it is teriparatide. After teriparatide, these are usually given calcium or the calcitonin, which helps in resorption of the calcium, right? So teriparatide, it's a drug which promote the formation of the bone, and calcitonin, bisphosphonates are the ones which actually inhibit the resorption of the bone. Theoretically speaking, we have got a drug known as strontium renylate, which helps in dual way, right? Which helps in inhibiting the resorption also and promoting the formation also. So remember this, teriparatide, these are synthetic parathyroid analogs, right? So given on a particular time of the day, these causes pulsatile surge in the level of the this PTH, and that PTH causes activity of the osteoblast, that stimulates the activity of the osteoblast. That's how it helps. Okay. One thing about the DEXA scan, in the last few years of exam, they have been after osteoporosis and scoliosis, two most important topics. So I want you to remember that it is recommended and it is mandatory in every patient after the 65 years of age. So if they ask you after what age the DEXA is recommended in every patient, it is 65, right? In some patients, if you are not able to identify the real cause of trauma with a minimal amount of trauma, if some patient is getting fractures, then it is advisable after the age of 55 also. But yes, in the age above 65, it is mandatory in every patient. So what I want you to remember from this topic of osteoporosis, point number one, the serum mineral, they will be normal. That is point one. Second, I want you to remember the most common sites. Third, I want you to remember what these sites show you. They show you what? Impacted fracture. Fourth, I want you to remember is what is the investigation of choice? DEXA, right? And what are its abnormal values? Say next, I want you to remember is the age at which the DEXA is done. Then I want you to remember is the treatment part, that what is the role of teriparatide, which is the drug of choice for any osteoporotic patient, whether it is a postmenopausal lady or it is a normal patient, right? These are important things that I want you to remember from here. So codfish spine appearance, when they talk about radiology, codfish spine appearance has been one of the important point which has been asked in your radiology in past few years. So remember that codfish spine appearance is a very, very important sign, right? So these all, that I marked are the ones which I want you to remember from the topic of osteoporosis. That's one. Okay. Next I have kept for you is an image. I know, I do believe that all of you will be easily able to mark it out that what deformity this child is having. So all of you can easily recognize that when I draw a long axis along the arm and then the forearm seems to be deviated where? Medially, correct? So this medial deviation is seen with which fracture, which injury? So remember that what I want you to recall from here, not only this injury, I want you to remember the deformity and the fractures and the condition with which they are associated, deformities and conditions. This is what my aim is. So which deformity is related to which condition? So when you see this deformity, what do you say about this deformity? What is this? This is what we call as the cubitus varus, correct? So cubitus varus. Cubitus varus is related to what? The malunion of supracondylar fracture of humerus. So malunion fracture supracondylar humerus. Okay. Second, similarly, if a child comes to you, if a question comes to you, if an image is given to you which gives you cubitus valgus, then what is the most likely cause? The most likely cause will be a non-union of which fracture? Non-union of fracture lateral condyle of humerus. Non-union of fracture lateral condyle of humerus. Number two. Number three is when you talk about the deformities related to the hip joint, after the elbow, the most important, the coxa. So if ever they give you a theoretical question about the coxa vara, how do we define coxa vara? I do believe you already know. So decrease or increase in the angle that's how you define the deformity of the hip joint. Which angle? The angle between the neck of the femur and the shaft of the femur. So whenever there is a decrease in the neck shaft angle of the femur, we call it coxa vara. What are the probable reasons for that? So reason for that can be simply the fracture neck of the femur, or without trauma, what are the conditions possible? It can be rickets when the child starts walking, the bones are soft, or what are the condition? When the head slips down, that is slipped capital femoral epiphysis. Or what can be the condition where the head will move down? It can be when the bone is soft, for example, in which tumor? In fibrous dysplasia. So in fibrous dysplasia, there is a special name given to this coxa vara. What do we call it? It is known as the Shepherd crook deformity. Remember that? The Shepherd crook deformity, the bent upper end of the stick. The bent upper end of the stick, that's what you call a Shepherd crook. So that's how the neck of the femur will be bent. Okay, when you have a coxa valga, you don't have many specific reason, but you should remember the classifications for the fracture neck of the femur. And we know that when you talk about Gardner's type 1, remember that Gardner's type 1 classification, what do we see? A incomplete valgus impacted fracture of the neck of the femur. So Gardner's type 1 is what shows you coxa valga. When you talk about the deformity of the knee, the genu varum or the genu valgum. So first is genu varum. Genu varum, where do you see the genu varum? Genu varum will be related to your conditions of most commonly the rickets. Am I right on that? Then second, it is osteoarthritis. Then second is osteoarthritis. Osteoarthritis of which side? Of medial side or lateral side? So osteoarthritis of the medial compartment. It is related to your coxa, the genu varum deformity, the medial compartment between the medial femoral condyle and the medial tibial condyle, between both of them. Okay. When you talk about the genu valgum, again remember this, again very very important, genu valgum, it can again be because of rickets, because in rickets we discuss two types of rickets, one which is rickets of prematurity and one which is nutritional. So varum usually is related to the nutritional one. Valgum valgum can be a part of the congenital one, right? It is usually like that. Valgum can have multiple other reasons also. For example, the osteoarthritis of which side? Of the other side, that is lateral compartment osteoarthritis. That is lateral compartment. So these are certain conditions out of which what I want you to remember, 1 and 2 most important ones, right? These are two most important one from which the questions are in majority of the MCQs. These two topics are being asked again and again, and you should remember that one is because of malunion and other is because of non-union, and for the same reason the lateral condyle of humerus, they are also known as what? The fractures of necessities. Clear? Right. Let's move on to the next one. So third I want you to remember is the eponyms of the fractures, right? The different fancy names that we know or that we learn to name a fracture. Why these eponyms are important? Because in last few years of examination we have seen that the eponyms have been asked in various ways. For example, in INI, how they ask it? Match side A with side B. So that's how the eponyms have been repeated time and again in last few years of examination. Okay, so eponyms, other thing with eponyms, when you are talking about the fracture fancy names, what other thing I want you to remember is the nerves which may be injured with a particular injury. Okay, so let's first start with the eponyms. When you talk about the hand, we start with the hand and we go proximally. Okay, so let's start with the upper limb eponyms. What are the different fancy name for fractures in the upper limbs? Okay, we'll start from the fingers, then gradually to the metacarpals, then to the forearm, and then to the arm, like that, gradually up. So number one, we start from the finger fractures. What are the fancy names we have? Mallet finger. What is that? Mallet finger fracture, avulsion fracture of the extensor tendon from the distal phalanx. That's what you call mallet finger in the finger. Okay, then second, when you talk about the metacarpals, there is one boxer's fracture, right? What is that boxer's fracture? Fracture of the neck of the fifth metacarpal. Third is what we call as the Rolando fracture, the Rolando and Bennett fracture. Where do we have these Rolando and Bennett fracture? The fracture of the base of first metacarpal. So Bennett is basically a partially intra-articular fracture which can have a displacement because of which tendon? Abductor pollicis longus. And this Rolando is a comminuted Y or T-shaped fracture which basically breaks the bone into multiple pieces. Okay, then number four, when we move up, we have fractures here at distal radius. What are those fractures? We have multiple names here. One is Coley's, then one is Smith. I hope you know the difference in these two. Then we have one, the Barton fracture, the intra-articular comminuted fracture. Then we have got a Schoffer fracture, right? The Schoffer fracture. Then number five, when you move up, then we have a fracture of the distal end of the radius with dislocation of the distal radioulnar joint. That's what you call Galeazzi fracture. And what's the other name for Galeazzi fracture? The fracture of necessity. The fracture of necessity. Okay. Number six, it is Monteggia fracture. Number six is Monteggia fracture. What is that Monteggia fracture? The fracture of the proximal radius, that is proximal 1/3 of ulna with dislocation of the proximal radioulnar joint, right? So fracture of proximal ulna with dislocation of proximal radioulnar joint, right? Then when you move up in the forearm only, we have got one very fancy name for a fracture, which is known as Essex Lopresti lesion. Now what's that Essex Lopresti lesion? What is that? Essex Lopresti lesion means injury to the distal ulna which gets subluxated, injury to whole the interosseous membrane, and then it goes up and hits the radial head. So three structures getting injured together, that's what you call a Essex Lopresti lesion. Then number 8, in the arm we have one fancy name which is known as Holstein-Lewis fracture. What was that Holstein-Lewis fracture? Remember that Holstein-Lewis? What was that Holstein-Lewis? A spiral oblique fracture of the distal 1/3 of the humerus, right, which can very commonly involve the radial nerve leading to wrist drop. So that's what I said. With the eponyms, you must remember the nerves which may be injured with the particular fracture. So these are eponyms from the upper limb. When you talk about the spinal region, what are the different names? What are the different injuries that you should recall from the spinal area? Let me also note them down. So when you talk about the fractures, starting from C1, we have got fracture in the spine. What is that? Jefferson's fracture. Related to which one? The C1, right? Related to C2, what was the fracture we have? We know a fracture known as hangman's fracture. And what kind of fracture is that? That's not a simple fracture. That's basically a spondylolisthesis. Am I right on that? Spondylolisthesis of what? Of C2 over C3. Spondylolisthesis of C2 over C3. Then we have other injuries like whiplash. What was whiplash? It was a soft tissue injury basically, which doesn't involve vertebrae usually but can break the cord sometimes. It's a sprained neck, right? The soft tissue injury. Then we have another one in the spine which is known as the Clay-Shawler's injury. And what does it involve? Clay-Shawler's. It involves avulsion of the spinous process, and usually of which bone? Usually the C7, right? Can be of T1 also. And then another injury that we have in the spine, that's what you call as the chance fracture. What's a chance fracture? A compression fracture of the vertebra with a fracture line passing through all the posterior elements. That means everything is gone. What's the other name for this chance fracture? That's what we call as the seat belt injury. That's what you call as the seat belt injury. So these are the eponyms, right, that you should remember from the spine also. Now when you go to the lower limb, we should start these eponyms starting from the pelvic areas. And I do believe in the lower limb you must be remembering 4 common patterns that I usually tell you in classrooms also. So lower limb, are the lower limb eponyms. When you start from the pelvis, in pelvis we have got 4. One is a straddle fracture, fracture of bilaterally both pubic rami. Then we have got a open book injury. What is that open book injury? The injury to the pubic rami, that is opening of the pubic rami, right? Then number 3, we have got Malgaigne fracture. Remember that Malgaigne? Fracture to the anterior part of the hemipelvis as well as posterior part from the pubic rami or to the sacroiliac joint, but on the same hemipelvis. When it is on the opposite hemipelvis, right side anteriorly damaged and posterior side, left side it is posteriorly damaged. So that's what you call as the bucket handle injury. So the bucket handle injury. Remember those 4. So bucket handle injury. So 1 in the pelvic area. When you go down in the femur, we don't have any such good name, but yes, 1 in the proximal tibia we can have 1 bumper's fracture. In the tibia we can have 1 bumper's fracture. That is 2, right? Bumper fracture is what? A depressed lateral tibial plateau fracture, which is occurring. Why? Because the bumper of the car is coming and hitting on the lateral tibial plateau. That's what you call bumper's fracture. Then when you move down in the ankle area, here you have multiple eponyms that I want you to remember. There are certain fractures at lower femoral condyle like Sigons and all. They are not that much important, but yes, bumpers is one important traumatic injury. Then at the ankle we have got multiple. What are those? One is what we call as the Pott's fracture, bimalleolar. Then we have Cotton's fracture, trimalleolar. Then we have the Pylon's fracture, which is known as the intra-articular fracture of the ankle. Then we have Maisonneuve fracture. Which is fracture around the ankle along with the fracture of proximal fibula, which can actually involve the common peroneal nerve. And you know that if the CPN is involved, what it can lead to? It can very well cause what? Foot drop, right? These are 4 important that I want you to remember from here. When you go down in the metatarsal, tarsal areas, we have got 2 fancy names. One is Lisfranc and one is Chopart. What are those? So Lisfranc is a tarsometatarsal injury. Chopart is intertarsal injury. So Lisfranc and Chopart. Then in the foot we have got Jones fracture, the fracture of the base of the fifth metatarsal, which has got a association with peroneus brevis. And these two are very, very important if ever you get a question in your exam about the inversion injury of the ankle. Then another one in the foot that you should remember is a march fracture, which actually most commonly seen in the second metatarsal, right? Reason is obvious, because the weight bearing axis passes through that area only. So second metatarsal is the most commonly injured bone, you can say metatarsal, you can say in the march fracture or the stress fractures. So these are different eponyms that I want you to remember. Again, I am repeating, along with the eponyms, you must know the fracture site and the nerve involved. Please do recall it. Fracture site and the nerve involved with it. Okay. So if I just tell you, revise very, very quickly from the upper limb. One, I want you to remember the proximal humerus. So if proximal humerus is gone, we know that which nerve is injured? Axillary nerve. What will be the implication? It will be motor as well as sensory. Motor as well as sensory. So sensory will be regimental badge sign. Sensory will be regimental badge sign. And what about motor part? Motor part will be, it will be affecting two main muscles, deltoid, because of which the patient won't be able to do 15 to 90 degrees of abduction, and teres minor, because of which the patient won't be having a problem, won't be able to do the external rotation, right? There will be weakness. Why only weakness? Why not palsy? Because you have infraspinatus also, which is, helping in the external rotation. Proximal humerus, axillary nerve. So whether it is dislocation or proximal humeral injury, proximal humeral fracture, axillary. Middle part of humerus or lower part of humerus, distal or middle 1/3 of humerus, they are radial nerve. Distal or middle humerus, which nerve? We know that it is radial nerve, leading to what? Wrist drop. Number 3, lateral condyle injury. Lateral condyle injury will lead to what? Tardy ulnar nerve palsy. Remember that? Tardy ulnar nerve palsy. That's usually it can lead to. It can also cause radial nerve, but it is usually related to the tardy ulnar nerve palsy, which is seen in which condition? Related to the fracture, lateral condyle of humerus, the non-union basically, right? Number 4, the medial condyle, if direct hit is there, it will lead to obviously the ulnar nerve injury because it is just below that. Then number 5, when there is montagia, when there is a montagia injury because of the dislocation of radial head, it will lead to PIN injury. So posterior interosseous nerve injury. So this PIN is here and this radial nerve is here. What is the difference? Extension of the wrist will be preserved. And which muscle will be preserving it? The extensor carpi radialis longus. The ECRL will preserve the extension of the wrist. The ECRL will preserve the extension of the wrist. So remember that. What will be the broad difference when the radial nerve is gone at radial, the shaft of the humerus, or when the PIN is gone because of the head of the radius? So it is all the ECRL, extensor carpi radialis longus. It will be preserving the movement of the wrist areas, right? That you should remember. Then next one, montagia. After that, you have got nerve involving in the carpal tunnel area. So when you talk about the carpal tunnel area, we know that in carpal tunnel, which is the nerve involved? Carpal tunnel, the nerve involved is median nerve. What are the conditions which can involve the median nerve? That we should remember. The median nerve can be involved as a part of Colles fracture, right? Number 1. Number 2, they can be involved as a part of the scaphoid injury. They can be involved as a part of lunate dislocation. These are 3 main injuries which can produce carpal tunnel syndrome. Remember that. Okay. Then these are common sites, and we should remember what will be their clinical implication also. Okay. So I want you to remember these things. These are very, very important. The nerve, the fracture site and the nerve. Similarly, in the lower limb, when you talk about the dislocations of the hip, the sciatic nerve, right? The posterior dislocation, sciatic nerve. Anterior dislocation, femoral nerve. The fibular injury, proximal fibula injury, that causes injury to the CPN, common peroneal nerve, leading to foot drop. These are what I want you to remember. Okay. When you talk about the nerve, please go through the entrapment neuropathies. I am mentioning it here because in these short time it is not possible to revise everything, but yes, I am highlighting the important things. So entrapment neuropathies are again important and you must remember it. So when you revise trauma, do revise the nerves injured, do revise their clinical implication as well as the entrapment neuropathies, at what area which nerve can be entrapped, right? So nerve injury with fracture, this is very, very important. Next one I have for you is scoliosis. So scoliosis has been again one of the most important topic which has been repeated again and again. Okay, what exactly is scoliosis? It is a lateral bending of the spine but that's an incomplete definition. So it is lateral bending with rotation of the spine. Remember that, okay? Lateral bending with rotation of the spine, that's what you call as scoliosis. So lateral bending with rotation of spine. So lateral bending with rotation of spine, or simply the vertebra. Instead of spine, I should say it vertebra. Now, why would somebody have a scoliosis? That's again something you should remember, recall. So scoliosis can be because of two reasons only. Either it is congenital or it is idiopathic. It is congenital or it is idiopathic. When do you call it congenital? When there is a defect in the vertebral bone formation, or after formation it's differentiation, okay? So when they say it is because of the defect of formation, what exactly is the reason? Either the vertebra is only wedge shape form, so wedge vertebra, or we call it hemivertebra. Either only half of the vertebra is formed or the wedge vertebra is formed, that leads to failure of formation. When you say failure of differentiation, that means the two vertebrae, they have failed to separate. So if they fail to separate, what do we call it? We call it a block vertebra, okay? When two vertebrae are stick together, there is no disc in between them. These are the reasons. They can give you the image. They can give you the image of wedge vertebra like this, and they can ask you what is the reason for scoliosis in this patient, or they can give you the hemivertebra like this, only half the vertebra is formed, so patient will be having a defect like this. So they can give you the picture, they can give you the x-ray, and they can ask you what is the reason for scoliosis in this particular patient. So you must remember the reason for scoliosis. That's point one. So definition, rotation with lateral bending is scoliosis. Second, the causes. Third point, the angle which is measured to see the degree of scoliosis. The angle is known as what? Cobb's angle. So you may have in your exam a image or a theoretical explanation where they say that the two vertebrae, upper and lower, the most deformed vertebrae are taken, and then through them we are drawing a perpendicular like this and a perpendicular like this. So wherever they intersect basically is what you call as the Cobb's angle. The other angle that I want you to remember from here, one is Cobb's angle that I have already mentioned here, right? Let me write them separately. So Cobb's angle we have written, it is for scoliosis. Number two, the Bowman's angle. Where do we see that Bowman's angle? So Bowman's angle seen in elbow area. Number three, the angle between the calcaneum bone, that is Bowler's and Gisane. So Bowler's angle and the Gisane angle, where did we read it? Calcaneum. When we talk about the fourth angle, it is in the CTV. So basically I want you to remember the angles of CTV also. What are all those angles? One is what you call as the talocalcaneal angle. One is what you call talocalcaneal angle, right? The other name for which is Kite's angle. Then I want you to remember the Meyer angle, talus and the first metatarsal, the Meyer angle. These are the angles that I want you to remember, because they can again be a part of your questionnaires when you have some kind of radiological imaging has been given, some kind of theory has been given. So these are different angles that you must remember. Coming back to the scoliosis, so angle you must remember, it is Cobb's angle, right? This scoliosis, they may ask you to differentiate between a postural scoliosis and a pathological scoliosis. So when you talk about a postural as well as pathological scoliosis, we must remember that the postural one, it will disappear when the patient stands straight and he tries to bend down. This one will disappear while the pathological one will persist. Okay. Now the braces which are used for scoliosis, I want you to remember those braces also. What are those braces known as? Those braces are either one in a child, it is Milwaukee brace. It is Milwaukee brace, or the other one, the other brace which can be given in an adolescent age group. This brace can be the Rizer's cast. That's what you call a Rizer's cast. So Milwaukee brace or the Rizer's cast. Milwaukee brace or the Rizer's cast. These are two which are commonly used. Boston is another one which can be used. But scoliosis and osteoporosis, I want everybody to be thorough, because there have been repeated questions from these two topics in past. Next one I have for you is supracondylar humerus. Now this is one again important topic that I want you to remember. Few important points about the supracondylar humeral injuries. What are those? Should remember that supracondylar humeral injuries, it is a most common fracture around elbow in a young child. Two types, extension or the flexion type. And how do we differentiate that? The X-ray that you are able to see on the screen, this is extension type, and this X-ray is what you call the flexion type, because here the distal fragment is coming where? On the palmar side. Here the distal fragment is coming where? On the dorsal side. So when the extension fragment goes on the dorsal side, it is extension kind of injury. When the fracture fragment goes on the palmar side, flexor side, it is a flexion kind of injury. So remember this, most of the supracondyles are extension kind of injuries. Okay, and the complication which is related to them is most important. So please remember the complications which are a part of supracondylar injuries, which can be number one, the most common, the acute case, you can say immediate complications, they can be the nerve involvement. Nerve, it is AMRU, I hope you remember it, anterior interosseous nerve, followed by median nerve, followed by radial nerve, followed by ulnar nerve. Okay. Second is about the vessel. Second is about the vessel. Which vessel? The brachial artery. Which vessel? The brachial artery. Okay. So these two can get compromised immediately after the injury, and that can lead to some problems, right? So if the vascularity is involved, it can lead to certain, very, very bad complications. These can help in raising the pressure of the compartment. These blood can cause a pressure on the muscle. Muscle may go into ischemia. So what we call it, instead of VIC, I should write here first of all Walkman's ischemia. So they can promote Walkman's ischemia. Once the ischemia is there, this ischemia can very well convert itself into compartment syndrome, right? And this compartment syndrome can very well finally damage the muscle. That's what you call Walkman's ischemic contracture. Okay, so compartment syndrome, VIC, this can be the trouble. This can be the trouble. And when do you call it as compartment syndrome? When the pressure has gone more than 30 millimeters of mercury. When the pressure has gone more than 30 millimeters of mercury, we call it compartment syndrome. Okay, so these are complications. Remember that the most common complication related to supracondylar humeral injury, it is malunion, and that malunion leads to what kind of deformity? We have read in the very first questionnaire that I discussed. It is the cubitus varus, the gun stock deformity we call it, right? And the treatment for that is osteotomy, French osteotomy, Dunn osteotomy, modified French osteotomy, different kind of osteotomies can be done. Okay, and one complication which can be a part of any injury around the elbow, it is myositis ossificans. It is myositis ossificans. Okay, so these are complications which you must remember, which you must remember when you're talking about supracondylar humeral injuries. Okay, so please, Bowman's, I have already explained to you. Bowman's angle, it is seen when you are trying to reduce the supracondylar injuries, whether it has been reduced properly or no. Then you can see this Bowman's angle. 64 to 81 degrees is considered normal Bowman's angle, and when it is more than 81 degrees, it is suggestive of a varus deformity of the elbow, right? The supracondylar. In old times, obsolete one now, but yes, in the olden time, you should remember that Dunlop traction was the one which was used. But nowadays, we don't treat the supracondyles by Dunlop. In fact, we treat it by its classification, which is known as Gartland's classification, right? So in Gartland classification, how do we divide the supracondyles? The type 1, it's an undisplaced fracture. Undisplaced means when the displacement is less than 2 millimeters. So undisplaced fracture. Second is partially displaced. Some contact is maintained, but it is more than 2 mm displacement. And then partially after number 3, it's completely displaced. Number 3 and 4 are completely displaced fractures, and number 4 is an unstable fracture, right? So undisplaced can be treated by only by reduction and by plaster application, right? It is just need plaster. This you try by close reduction and plaster. If it is not remaining in place, then we can go for pinning, but these will require open reduction and internal fixation always. Okay, next I have kept for you is this injury. What is that? Colles. A hot topic, was asked in INI also. This can be very well a repeat here in the NEET also. Okay, Colles fracture. This time what they ask, I do believe you know all the basic points about Colles. The fracture at distal end of radius at its corticocancellous junction, and that's why it is more common in osteoporotic patients. Correct? Am I right on that? Now, this has got 6 displacements related to it, the Colles fracture. What are the 6 displacements which are a part of Colles? L, I, D, S. What are those? Lateral displacement and lateral tilt, right? Lateral displacement and lateral tilt. I is impaction. D is dorsal displacement and dorsal tilt. And S is supination. So again the impaction has come over here after the vertebra. So these are 6 displacements. Now Colles fracture, the complication related to the Colles fracture, the most common always remains stiffness of the finger joints, of the elbow joint, of the wrist joint, of the shoulder joint. So stiffness of the joint is the most common complication. But when they ask you about the deformity, then it is because of malunion, and the deformity you all know is known as dinner fork. While on other hand, the deformity of the Smith fracture will be known as what? What do you call it? The garden spade deformity. So garden spade in Smith and dinner fork in Colles. So dinner fork deformity, garden spade deformity, okay, these are of the Smith. Other complication, one I have already told you, this can cause a compression of the median nerve. So this can produce carpal tunnel syndrome. This can produce carpal tunnel syndrome. Then it can rupture one tendon. Which tendon? The rupture of extensor pollicis longus. Rupture of extensor pollicis longus. And in long term, it can produce a complication because of hyperactivity of the sympathetic tone, and that is Sudeck's dystrophy. That's what you call a Sudeck's dystrophy. So remember the complications of Colles. Stiffness of the joint is a non-specific thing, and it remains the complication all the time with all the fractures wherever you are applying the plaster, right? So remember about Colles. In Colles, this time they asked in NEET exam, in the INI exam, that how do you reduce it? So when there is an impaction, when they are simply saying there is an impaction, how do I relieve the impaction? Obviously, I'll give a traction, right? I'll give a traction to remove the impaction. And after the traction, how do we block the arm? How do we block the wrist? It is blocked in palmar flexion and ulnar deviation. It is blocked in palmar flexion and ulnar deviation. So if I tell you how the Colles are, fractures are reduced, step 1 is always the traction. But step 2 is not palmar flexion or ulnar deviation. What we do is, we just, pull the limb in both the direction, the wrist area. So that 2 fragments which are engaged, they go away from each other. So one is traction. After that, we go for, dorsal deviation like this. We increase the deformity so that the 2 engaged fragment, they go away from each other. So once they are away from each other, then we go for palmar flexion and ulnar deviation. Okay. So steps are actually, step 1 is traction. Step 2 is dorsal deviation of the wrist of the distal fragment, and then third step is palmar flexion and ulnar deviation. That's how you block the wrist for Colles fracture. So remember, traction, dorsal deviation, third step will be to bring it down, palmar flexion and ulnar deviation. That's how you block it in the handshake or the shake hand position, you call it, right? That's what I want you to remember from Colles and Smith. Please do remember. Next, I want you to remember again a pictorial presentation of this condition, where you will be given a patient which has got an X-ray like this, some pus discharge from somewhere, some history of fever, some history of old surgery, some infection somewhere like that, and I want you to remember the image of chronic osteomyelitis. I want you to remember the image of chronic osteomyelitis. Okay, so how do I remember this chronic osteomyelitis? A cavity here. What I want you to recall here, this is what we call as the sequestrum. This is what we call as the sequestrum. Okay, this all black that you see here is what you call as the granulation tissue. Right? And this all white area that you will see all around the bone is what you call as what? The involucrum. Okay, so please see, have a look on an X-ray of chronic osteomyelitis before you are going for the NEET exam. Do expect a question from infection at least, either from chronic osteomyelitis, either from Brodie's abscess, either from in some clinical form, either in some radiological form, but go with the expectation that from infection there will be surely one question, right? So go there. It is high probability. There is a lot of probability of having a question from chronic osteomyelitis in your this upcoming NEET examination. Okay, so please do revise the sequestrum, granulation tissue, involucrum, and cloaca. Usually they don't give you, so these 3 things, these 2 things broadly, you should know how they are looking on X-rays. We must be aware of that, right? That is number 7, chronic osteomyelitis. Number 8 I have kept is the tumor. Now all of you can easily recognize it. Why I have kept this tumor? This tumor, you can see it is located where? It is located at epiphysis. So I know 2 epiphyseal tumors, giant cell tumor and chondroblastoma. Again, the image, the flow chart that I have given to you, the image basically of the tumors that I have given to you, I want you to revise that image before you go to the exam, because in that image what we have done, we have already mentioned all the tumors as per their specific site and with their all special features. So I want you to remember them. Okay, so epiphysis, I know there are only two tumors, either giant cell tumor or it is chondroblastoma. And what is the basic difference between these two? Blastoma is a blastic lesion and it will have some, bone formations which we call as punctate calcification, stippled calcification. Giant cell tumor, it is seen in the age group of 20 to 40 years with the other name of osteoclastoma. So it has to show me some lytic lesion, clastoma. So if we have a lytic lesion with septations inside, and these septations are what you call as what? The soap bubble appearance. So that gives me the hint that it is not chondroblastoma, most likely it is a soap bubble appearance. So giant cell tumor 20 to 40, chondroblastoma, it is usually 10 to 25. So I must be able to see some growth line here, growth plate here, which is not visible in this particular X-ray. Okay, so do remember, whenever they give you one tumor, if they want you to identify radiologically or pathologically, please see what is the location of that tumor. If you are able to identify the location, then your answer becomes pretty easy, that whether you have to answer from epiphysis or metaphysis or from diaphyseal area. Okay, so this is soap bubble appearance and giant cell tumor. I want you to remember the important points about giant cell tumor, that the giant cell tumors, they are, locally aggressive tumor, and the malignant transformation of giant cell tumor, it is less than 5%. They have less than 5% chance of converting into malignancy, and therefore for the same reason we have the treatment of choice for giant cell tumor as what? What treatment do we give? The treatment would be excision only if you are suspecting the malignancy. Otherwise what we do, we just curate it out. We just go for curettage and bone grafting. We just go for curettage and bone grafting. Okay, so we'll just clean it out and we'll put some bone graft. If you think that it is going into malignancy, then what do? Then we can go for excision. And once you go for excision, you can put other bone here. That is the upper end of opposite fibula. That is put. So excision plus upper end of replacement by the upper end of fibula. Fibula is placed here. So that's how you treat the giant cell tumor. Do remember, chemotherapy and radiotherapy, they have very, very limited role. We don't have a role to play here in giant cell tumor, right? Because this is just a locally aggressive tumor. It doesn't show you metastasis. So there is no role of chemotherapy or radiotherapy in this tumor because it is not getting into the system. Okay. Now, next one I have for you is this another tumor, which is like this, and which will show you multiple rays of the bones spreading to all the sides, right? I hope you can easily recognize it. It is what you call as the sun ray appearance. And when you see the other X-ray of the same tumor, you'll be able to see this elevation here. That's what you call Codman's triangle. So sun ray appearance at Codman's triangle, you might get a pathological section of the bone also, where they will be giving you the bone like this, and there will be a growth coming from the metaphyseal area and involving this much part of the bone. So when, again, as I said in giant cell tumor also, in osteosarcoma, again I'm telling you, whenever they give you a gross specimen, whenever they give you an X-ray, whenever they want you to go to the diagnosis by giving you some theoretical lines, always see that where exactly the tumor is located. Location is of utmost important. Second thing, try to see what kind of periosteal reaction do you observe over there. If there is a lot of periosteal response, that means it has to do something with the malignancy, right? So either it will be Ewing sarcoma, either it will be osteosarcoma like that, or it will be other benign tumors, right? So location, try to find the nature if you can, or simply just try to find out the special feature about that particular tumor. Like in this particular X-ray, I'm able to see the sun rays. I'm able to see the elevation of this tumor. That's Codman's triangle, right? So this is very, very important. Okay. The last I have kept is a photo of the splint which I've taken from the nerve injury topic. But again, I would recommend you please go through the file that I have already shared on all the possible groups of DBMCI as well as my own group, the file of all the splints, of all the instruments of orthopedics, because in every exam we are seeing that there is one instrument which is being asked to you, right? So what all instrument I want you to see, minimum at least the splints, I am coming to it. The instrument that I want you to see and observe is number one, the periosteum elevator. Okay, number one is the periosteum elevator. Number two, I want you to see the chisel. Number 3, I want you to see the osteotome, right? So chisel, osteotome, periosteum, elevator, these are 3 most important, repeatedly asked instruments from orthopedics. So have a look how these 3 look like. Periosteum, elevator, osteotome and chisel, how are they different, right? Other than that, I have already shared one file with you, but you must be aware of all of them, the K-wires, the nails, the plates, the external fixators. Yes, that is another important thing, the external fixators. How does Elizaro looks? How does, AO clamps looks? How does the rail fixator looks? This you must be aware of. When you talk about the splints, the, braces, I want you to remember the braces of these nerve injury. The first one that you see is what you call as the knuckle bender splint, because the knuckles have been bent. Remember this, knuckles have been bent to keep the finger extended. And in second one, the wrist is kept elevated so that it doesn't bend down. These are known as cock-up splint. When the cock-up splint is, having no spring, no movement, it is known as the static cock-up splint. But here there are certain springs attached. So spring one is known as dynamic cock-up splint. So dynamic cock-up splint, or the static cock-up splint, or the knuckle bender splint, or the splints related to your braces related to your scoliosis, the braces related to your CTV, the Dennis Brown splint, okay, the Dennis Brown splint. I want you to remember that. So please go through the file once so that you can, revise and do well in the image-based these examinations. Okay, so these were the 10 most important topics that I wanted you to remember, that I want you to keep in mind and revise at the last moment. So please go through the files as I have mentioned in these slides. If for any kind of other academic assistance I can help you out with, please do let me know, right? So again, I say, I do believe you already have prepared well, without any kind of stress, without any kind of, hesitation, without any kind of fear in your mind. Go for the exam. And I have trust in you. You are going to do well for sure. Okay. So do let me know if I can be of any help and perform well in your exams. My best wishes to all of you. Thank you so much.